And good morning, everybody. I'll try to, sorry.
Make sure we're at the beginning and not the end. Okay, so on the left, and if you need a pointer.
Thank you. Thanks again. I'll try to share with you some views on how the IA values concentrating solar power. And I'll do so. Wait. I'll do so. It's not moving. Let me try.
Try
This one.
arrows.
Okay. And I'll do so starting from a broader perspective on our vision of the deployment of renewable in the current context of the PV surprise, the relative disappointment with respect to concentrating solar power, why we believe it might survive after all, and then I'll go into a few other concluding considerations. But let's start with our recent medium-term market report for renewable electricity. And we see that renewables are doing pretty well those days. Non-hydro renewables have doubled in generation in the last 5 years, and generation from those renewables is going to double again in the next 5 years. So it's a pretty remarkable dynamics. Hydropower itself is not only the largest renewable technology, but also the one that increased the fastest. And in the last 5 years, it has added more kilowatt hours than all other renewable combined. In the next 5 years, it will still remain the largest the fastest growing single renewable energy technology. And all in all, what is remarkable is that generation from renewable by 2016 or about will overtake generation of electricity from natural gas in the world and double generation from nuclear in the world. And this is a remarkable accomplishment, which is just about in all our projects that are registered in our databases. Now there's a PV surprise. The PV cost fell much more rapidly than expected. Here you have two graphs representing the cost of PV utility scale PV systems, not only the modules, but the whole system. And you see that all elements of price have been reduced much more than expected. In the graph on the right-hand side represents a forecast made in 2011. And if you follow that forecast, we are already in 2019. Now, if you consider that there is some commercial war and that prices do not tell the reality of costs, and you look at the sustainable costs that we evaluate at about 80 cents per watt for PV modules, which is almost exactly the agreement with China and the EU. You realize that we are already in 2017. So it's on the basis of technology improvement, it has been a major accomplishment, and you see below the updated forecast by Bloomberg New Energy Finance, where you see the very rapid reduction in cost we have in the last 2 years. On this basis, you can predict an explosive growth of PV around the world, in all parts of the world, and you see China stepping in very rapidly here. And you see that if you compare this projection now with what we set as a target for PV industry in our IA technology roadmap for PV, launched in May 2010, you will see that our projection now is far in advance over the targets we assigned to PV. And by 2020, we'll probably have doubled the target we have set for PV. And we'll make the comparison with the one for CSP in a minute. Now in the US, there was another surprise in the same time, which is the emergence of shale gas. And of course, it's another additional difficulty for the CSP industry in this continent. So what are our projections for solar thermal electricity in the various parts of the world and total? Well, the total is basically one order of magnitude lower than the total expected for PV, even till 2018. So it's, of course, a very important difference, and that is generation, not capacity, but due to higher capacity factor, of course, the gap between capacities is even more important than that. You see that by region, you see what are the trends. It's increasing in the US, it's increasing in Africa and Middle East, Australia, Asia, and now it's decreasing in Europe due to the situation and the policy situation in Spain mostly. Now let's look at different projections made for CSP by the IEA in various publications at different time horizons. In the roadmap we published in 2010, we assigned a target of almost 150 gigawatts by 2020, and now we predict 12 to 14 gigawatts by 2018, and 2 more years will add a few gigawatts, but will not fulfill that gap, of course. Even worse, when you look at our projection for 2035, well, depending on the scenario, we might be well above or still below the target we had set for 2020. After all these depressing thoughts, let me go to the longer time horizon, and you see that when you compare the target set in the roadmap for 2050, and we compare that with the recent energy technology perspectives published last year, we see that this target is still compatible with the high renewable scenario in that publication. So we still believe in the future of the technology in a world that strives for mitigating climate change while providing energy security to all inhabitants. And here you have some details on this perspective to 2050, where you see that we need to completely modify the electricity mix worldwide. We need to basically give up with coal without CCS. We would have some respective amount of gas and some important amount of nuke, at least in the central scenario, which is the one compatible with keeping global climate change limited to 2 Celsius degrees. We would have a big increase in renewables. Renewables would do almost 60% of the total electricity, and that's basically 3 parts. Wind power on top, where you see offshore and land-based wind power. Solar, and you see 2 different colors, that's PV and CSP, basically equal parts in generation, and the big blue is hydropower. And now if you go to the higher-end scenario, where you have less nuke and less CCS, for a variety of reasons that I leave to your imagination, you see that renewables would need to provide 70% of world electricity at the time. But the big chunk of it that increases between the 2 scenarios is solar. Wind, to some extent, and solar are those who benefit, because hydropower is less expensive, so in all scenarios it comes to its maximum, which is defined by the capacities and the lead times to build new hydropower plants. But solar, wind and solar are the 2 options that allow us to go to increase the share of renewable in the mix. But of course, wind power and solar PV are variable renewable energy, and those create a number of difficulties for the grid, and that's where the value of CSP lies, and that's why you have also still half PV and half CSP in this projection. CSP costs more than PV and will probably continue to cost more, but it has built-in thermal storage, very efficient, relatively cheap. Today it's very useful when the demand peaks after sunset, but it will be also even more useful in other parts of the world when PV will have saturated the PV plus the minimum load from backup if needed, will have saturated the demand during daytime at around noon. Finally, there is only one competing option, which is PV plus storage. And PV plus storage means in reality PV plus pumped hydro. Pumped hydro should not be under-evaluated. There are still many options and many opportunities to build pumped hydro plants. But still, it cannot be done everywhere, and it has a cost, and it has losses. It's efficient, but not as efficient as thermal storage. So this is how we see the competition for the future, PV plus pump storage and CSP. And if you look at some recent announcements like Saudi Arabia, you see that these guys have been realizing that it's crazy to burn oil to generate electricity under heavy sunshine, and that they could sell sell a little more oil. But what they have designed is a plan with important amount of PV, but even more important amounts of CSP, and I think it's based on sound analysis. On top of that, solar thermal electricity is very flexible, and instead of being a competitor for PV, could be an enabler for integrating more PV, especially when it replaces coal, but I think Paul has amply demonstrated that. Don't make a mistake, the relationship between more variable renewables and storage is not univocal. It depends, circumstances and time. Here you see in Germany, during summer afternoons, more PV shaves the daily peak, and there is not an evening peak in the summer and spring. So in fact, it reduces the gap of price between peak and baseload price electricity. So it makes storage unuseful in the first instance, and that's what we see today in Germany. But if we continue to increase PV capacities in such situation, then we are going to recreate that gap and make arbitrage again a valuable business model. So in the short term, PV reduce, not everywhere, but at least in this case, reduce the value of storage, but more PV will increase the value of storage in the longer term. And let me turn to the possible role of storage. Those who have been here in the former conference have already seen that, because I'm showing it almost every time, but I insist. You can think of storage for different purposes. The first with similar solar field. The first design would simply shift generation to the afternoon and late afternoon and early evening to better address the peak demands and enhance the value of electricity. Another design would go to base load, and that would reduce the cost, but not necessarily make it a better competitor, because base load electricity generation is the cheapest one. Or you could even do quite the opposite and concentrate generation during the peak hours only. And that would make the electricity cost more, but value much more. So it may be a reasonable choice. It all depends. And finally, this I added for this year, because I cannot just only show the same slide, so I had to find something new. And the fact is that you can more or less combine all of the above to some extent, because if you can design a plan that will focus on peak times during winter, when you have only 60% of the resource available in most places. But then you extend the hours during summer to mid-peak times, and you produce finally from 8 to midnight. Of course, you don't produce during off-peak times because the value is too small. And this, again, would need to be tailored to every circumstances, but it's just to show that you can have a wide range of options and possibilities. Plus, of course, you have the other sources of value, reserves, voltage control, ramps that Paul commented on. So in essence, storage increases the value where and when the peak is after sunset, and that's immediate in countries that have such big demand peak after sunset. In Morocco, in India, in South Africa. In India, it's obvious you have a real increase right after sunset of the electricity demand, still largely driven by lighting. So again, in winter, you could design a plant that only starts operating after sunset. In other areas, the greater flexibility and dispatchability of solar thermal electricity may help compete with PV, but may not be enough. It depends. Reserve value, etc., that's important, but that may not be enough to compete with PV today. But certainly it will be in the future when you have to reach 33% of electricity from all renewables. You'll be in a different case with 10% or 15% from PV, and that will be different because more PV will move all net peak load towards the evening and possibly also the early morning. I agree with that. So the most important thing, first, maybe it's not needed, and Paul did not mention it because it's not needed here in California where you have a market, a wholesale market, which is a hourly market. So the value of generating electricity at different point of the day is already communicated to the generators. But in many other cases, what you have is a feed-in tariff. What you have is a bid with a tariff structure that doesn't change, that does not reflect time-based real costs. In that case, you have to make this difference in this tariff, and policymakers and regulators need to make this, and that the first things to do before going to value reserves and ancillary services, you need to value the electricity at its avoided cost, and it's not obvious everywhere. A good example is the third bid for CSP procurements in South Africa, where they have introduced a multiplier between daytime generation and evening generation, which is of 2.4, and it makes a real difference then between that will help developers tailor their plans to better fit the need of the country and, of course, get more profitable investments as well. I will pass on this one for the sake of time, but there is a niche market which is a solar booster on coal plants, because solar fields can provide low temperature heat and coal provides very high temperature heat, and there is a good match between both. I will not extend that. Beyond thermal storage, of course, we'll need to think of interseasonal storage, and that goes to solar fuels, which remain important for the future, but also for mobile utilizations. So it's important that we work on that and that we keep working on that. So I have 4 policy conclusions. It's important to abolish arbitrary restriction in hybridization in order to have to tap all possible option and niche markets and go down the learning curves. It's important to reward flexibility and dispatchability and reform electricity markets, or reform the incentive systems when they are the drivers for installing CSP plants. It's important to give solar fuels real money for research and development. And we have heard yesterday a very good technical keynote speech on that. But current levels are really low compared to the what is at stakes. And of course, we should never neglect the easy first step, like solar water heaters, like process heat for industries. And of course, CSP again has a role to play in providing high temperature process heat for many industries in order to tailor comprehensive and integrated approaches. To conclude, apart from this publicity for our publication, that is, I'm sorry to say that you cannot buy the PDF anymore. You can only have it for free on the website. I'd like just to conclude to say the IEA value CSP very much. It's not figures as given by Paul, but it's a real and deep appreciation. We value CSP very much, and so do we value SolarPace's implementing agreement. Thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any questions for Cedric? Okay.
Sylvain Roda from the CEA in France. I have a question about low gas price and exploitation of shale gas. Sorry, don't you think it's a real threat for the solar energy market? And how can we anticipate? And maybe solar fuels are an option by promoting solar reforming or methane cracking, for example.
Well, I think shale gas is a real competitor for CSP electricity in the US. I'm not sure it's going to be a competitor for CSP in other parts of the world. There are possibilities of exploring and exploiting shale gas in other parts of the world, but there are also a number of specificities in the US market that explain why it's took place in the US, and it's not obvious that it will be a big boom anywhere else. It might be, but this remains to be seen in basically all parts of the world where they have been talking about shale gas. It has not happened yet, and there are reasons for that. Now, I'm not sure that solar fuels is the issue. Today, it will be, I think of it as an option for the future to extend the penetration of solar energy beyond what you can achieve with electrification of the society. But you can already achieve a lot with electrification. Just think of electrifying vehicles, and you can do a lot with the plug-in hybrids that will help consume electricity and absorb electricity that's produced during daytime, even by PV or CSP, whichever. So it's unclear to me that you can oppose solar fuels and shale gas. But yes, shale gas in the short term is a problem for CSP industry in the US, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Cedric. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's give it another round of applause. Okay, sorry for the delay. Our next speaker is David Hochschild. He's a commissioner from the California Energy Commission. David was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown in February of this year. He fills the environmental position on the 5-member commission, wherefore the 5 members by law are required to have professional training in specific areas: engineering or physical science, environmental protection, economics, and law. Commissioner Hochschild's career has spanned public service, environmental advocacy, and the private sector. He was first involved in solar energy field in 2001 in San Francisco as a special assistant to Mayor Willie Brown, where he launched the citywide $100 million initiative to put solar panels on public buildings. He went on to co-found the Volt Solar Initiative a 60,000-member advocacy organization promoting solar policies at local, state, and federal level. He served as an executive director on a national consortium of leading solar manufacturers and worked for 5 years at Solaria, a solar company in Silicon Valley in 2007 and 2008. He served as a commissioner in San Francisco Public Utility Commission. So I'd like to welcome David here.
Good morning, friends. How's everyone doing? All right. Late night at the casino, huh? All right, good to be here. I'm David Hochschild with the California Energy Commission, and I'll just start off by saying I have sort of the Brady Bunch philosophy about renewables, which is that we are all a family of renewable technologies. We want every kid eventually to, get an education and move out of the house, get a job, and I think we're well on our way there with some. I think some kids take more nurturing and attention, but I'm very optimistic. We're on a path to success with all these technologies, including CSP. Let's just begin by going back for a minute to 1974, which is the year actually the Energy Commission was founded, right? California was facing growth rates of 6% a year. There was a study done by the RAND Corporation projecting that we would need to build as many as 60 nuclear power plants, one every 20 miles along the entire California coastline, right? And that's what gave birth to the Energy Commission. We have to push for alternatives, we have to push for efficiency, and I want to provide a little bit of context today about that because it's a success story. I think we tend to focus a lot more on what's gone wrong, but it's also important as we have this discussion to look at what's gone right. So the Energy Commission was created 40 years ago. We have a range of services we provide, including permitting all solar thermal power plants and gas power plants 50 megawatts and up. Providing analysis, we fund $140 million a year of R&D. That was just reauthorized by the legislature, so we'll be doing that at least for another 7 years. And then we do all the energy efficiency standards for appliances and for buildings, do about $100 million a year in clean transportation funding. That also was just reauthorized last week through 2020, so we have another $700 million in the pipeline for that. And we do certification and verification of renewables, contingency planning, and the annual IPER report. There's 5 of us on the commission. I'm the lead for renewables. Bob Weisenmiller is the chair. He's the lead for R&D. Janaea Scott, many of you may have worked with her when she was at the Department of Energy doing fast-tracking permitting for clean energy projects. She's the lead for transportation. My colleagues Xander McAllister and Karen Douglas work on efficiency and siting, respectively. So I want to just start with sort of follow the loading order. This is, this is refrigerators. Just as an example, I think of a policy success story. This represents the energy usage of refrigerators up until the first standard was passed after the Energy Commission was created in the 70s. And we passed those standards. Energy consumption dropped dramatically. At the same time, we see actually the cost of the refrigerators coming down, and the size of the refrigerators getting bigger. And I think there's no better argument for the role that policy can play. And I think the challenge we face with CSP is as much a policy challenge as it is a technology challenge. And there's a lot of success stories here with policy. Just again, with efficiency, the savings, there's been actually over $140 billion of savings to California ratepayers as a result just of the savings we have on appliances and buildings. About $75 billion of that comes from the electricity sector, about $65 billion roughly from the natural gas savings. And of course, everyone's seen this called the Rosenfeld curve. Essentially, California is using half the energy per capita today as we are compared to the rest of the country. I want to just show this slide because you'll see the bulb on the right. For folks who don't know, last week was actually a pretty historic event. We had the first LED bulb come on the market that complies with the Energy Commission's quality standards. So we set a rule, basically we want to get, we give away about $1.3 billion a year in California for energy efficiency rebates statewide. And starting December 12th, no LED bulb can get a rebate unless it meets these standards. The main feature is that the color rendition has to be above 90. This is a 93 color rendition bulb. It lasts for 25 years. It uses 85% less energy. It's fully dimmable. It's on the market for less than $20. All right, and this is a consequence, again, of policy. I saw this bulb last week. This is a standard screw lamp, A-lamp bulb. And this is an example of a transformative technology that we have evolved to because of policy. And I think we're going to see very steep cost reduction. Again, 60% of the light fixtures in California are actually still incandescent. I don't know what the number is nationwide, but I imagine it's somewhat higher than that. Just swapping out these new bulbs, the new LED bulbs, which you can't tell the difference in the light quality between that and an incandescent, that alone would bring the whole state load down by 5%. So even as we're talking about where energy should come from, let's always think about what it's being used for and how to reduce it. We have a 33% RPS in California. It was increased from a 20% RPS. This was one of the first bills that Governor Brown signed. We are well on our way to meeting that goal. I think everyone believes we're going to hit that goal by 2020. And in order to do that, we need to have the grid be as flexible as possible. We're going to do just a quick California clean energy tour. I've had the opportunity to be, since I started this job, visiting these sites all over the state. This is the largest wind project in the world, the Alta Wind Energy Park. It's a 1.5 gigawatt project in Kern County. Actually, they're adding 200 megawatts from now to December. 600 turbines. It's enabled actually a cement factory there to remain open and a wind turbine manufacturing facility to remain open. The GE operates that facility, and it's now the second largest taxpayer in the county, contributing $40 million a year in taxes. And I just think it's worth noting, a few years ago when Solyndra went out of business, that really chilled the entire clean energy space. But I really believe the good news stories are much more significant. There's projects of this size that just haven't gotten anywhere near the attention they deserve. This is the largest thin film PV solar project in the world. It's a first solar project in Riverside County. It's 550 megawatts in size. It's about 2/3 of the way complete at this point, roughly. They're installing it at a rate of a megawatt a day. When I was there a few months ago, just seeing the scale, it wasn't too long ago that just doing a megawatt project was a huge deal in the solar industry, but this is where we are today. This is a lower efficiency thin film cadmium telluride technology, fixed tilt. This is the world's largest crystalline PV project, also in California, San Luis Obispo County, 579 megawatts. This is a single axis tracker sun power technology. This is the world's largest geothermal power plant in Napa County in California, about 900 megawatts, been operating for 20, 25 years, very successful. And this is what we should all think of as sort of Gen 1 of CSP, the SEGS plant, I'm sure. How many people here have been to this facility? Raise your hands. Handful of folks, good number of folks. Well, I was just there for the first time myself last month. And I got to say, it's just really impressive looking at a facility that's been operating for 26 years and still going strong, 310 megawatts in size. This is what we should sort of think of as Gen 2, the Ivanpah project. How many people have been to this facility? Raise your hands. A couple folks, yeah. So I think everyone's familiar with this. 3 power towers here, 173,000 heliostats on an algorithm that track the sun and point towards the top of the 450-foot towers there to generate power. The first unit of this is going to come online at the end of next month, the second unit at the end of November, and the third unit at the end of December, and we expect it will be dedicated in January. This is the largest solar thermal project in the world, 370 megawatts. And again, I mean, the scale that the industry has gotten to, and I think the lessons learned, by the way, in construction are going to enable lower costs going forward. So just to put it in context again for California, what is happening, the chart on the left represents the portfolio of renewables as it looks roughly today, with geothermal 32%, biomass 15%, wind 35%, solar 3 to 4%, small hydro 15%, and going forward, what it will be in 2020. We expect solar to be 46% of the RPS, wind 32%, geothermal 13%, and the rest split among small hydro and biomass. Obviously, most of that solar is going to be PV, but I think CSP has a crucial role to play. And I think one of the arguments that was made earlier, I really agree with, is that CSP is really an enabler more than a competitor to PV. I think the challenge is to come up with policies that appropriately monetize that benefit. Just again, here's how we stack up against the rest of the world. You have countries like Iceland and Norway, New Zealand, and others that are way ahead of us. We have a long way to go. I will say the governor is obviously very committed to getting to the 33% goal. That is widely seen as a floor rather than a ceiling. And this is a slide I stole from DOE, just in terms of what we're seeing as costs come down for PV, how the market adoption goes up. And of course, the same thing is true for wind. We want to see the same trend happen for CSP. I'll just wrap up on a couple sort of pieces of news. One is that last week in California, we ended our legislative session, and actually a remarkably, in my view, positive and important piece of energy legislation passed, AB 327, which did two things. One is it raised the net metering cap for another 4 years. So basically, that's good for the DG side of things for solar. But it also moved the authority, or granted the authority from the legislature to the Public Utilities Commission to raise the RPS. So right now we have this 33% RPS, and prior to that bill passing, the only way to raise that was legislatively. Now the option, at least for the investor-owned utilities, which represent about 75% of our state, they can now, the RPS those targets can be effectively raised by the Public Utilities Commission. So that's strategically, I think, a very significant development. And yeah, I'll just say we are supporting CSP through our own R&D program. We would welcome all of your input as we develop that plan. We've given, I think, $5 million away in the last few years to various parts of the R&D space, but we have a terrific head of our R&D program, and that there will be a public process for folks to give their input on how we can best deploy our resources to support the success of CSP. Thanks so much.
All right, do we have any questions for David? Okay.
Good morning, Kara Libby from EPRI. I was curious about the EPIC program and how that might support CSP research, and if you have any updates on timing.
Yeah, so there is a rough sort of EPIC investment plan. Again, this is this $140 million a year that has now been reauthorized. There will be an opportunity for input on that plan. The woman who's running that is Lori Tenhope is her name. One of the things I'm interested in doing is actually some roundtable discussions specific to technologies to get the best input, and I'm actually considering doing something around that. I have one scheduled for geothermal. I'm interested in doing something along those lines for CSP. We don't have a lot of resources. Most of that money is not going to be going to CSP, but for the portion that is, I want to make sure that it's well spent. In my site visits so far to these projects, I mean, the thing that strikes me is, the low-hanging fruit, if it could be developed and advanced as a new synthetic oil that could go to higher temperature, it seems like that would have, a really positive impact. But I understand that's quite expensive. But anyways, we haven't dug too deep in that, but there are going to be this fall some opportunities for input on that. Thanks.
Do we have a question?
Ivan Nermanovsky, Sandy Labs. California seems to be way ahead of everybody on this subject, which is great. One thing that I think is on everybody's mind when it comes to renewables is permitting. There is a big legislative or bureaucratic red tape anytime you want to put a solar panel on your roof. Can you foresee a time in California, maybe not in the too distant future, when buying a solar panel is just like buying a stovetop?
Yeah, the issue is you got to interconnect to the grid, and so it's complicated. If you look at the cost differential for solar, we're talking really about PV here, in Germany versus California, it's about 1/3 cheaper in Germany, and one of the main reasons for that is permitting. It costs, on average, about $4,000 to get through all the permitting red tape, and that's something, there is a big campaign to fast track that and to try and reward the counties who do it. It's problematic because at the local level, I mean, it's distributed among, our 58 counties, and then sometimes there's multiple permits. At the large scale level, we have this Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, with the idea being to identify sites that are suitable for large scale projects and have fast track permitting there. And then other land set aside for conservation. My colleague Commissioner Douglas has been leading that, and that plan is expected to be finalized later this year. I'm not too close to the details on that, but she's been the lead on that. Thanks. Yep.
Can we have another round of applause for Commissioner Hochschild? Okay, so we're going to begin the next part of the meeting, which is a roundtable. All of our speakers are going to stay up here. And we have a few additional people that are going to participate, so I will introduce them. At the far end of the table is Udi Heilman, who is a senior advisor for Bright Source Energy. Udi consults on economic and policy analysis for Bright Source Energy, the CSP Alliance, as well as other energy firms and organizations. He was a principal focused on market design and policy analysis in the Market and Infrastructure Development Division of the California Independent System Operator, or CAISO. Before that, he worked for almost 10 years on electric power market design and monitoring at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, in Washington, D.C. So Udi, and then our last panelist is Elaine Sisson Labrea. Elaine is from Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and she oversees renewable energy R&D and procurement for the Energy and R&D Department at SMUD. She has over 20 years experience in the energy area and has a BS in electrical engineering from UC Berkeley and is a registered PE in California. Okay, so the topic of the panel discussion is discussing the value of CSP. Paul talked a little bit about the value as well, and Cedric mentioned some of these, and so we're going to try to talk through some of these issues. Fred had put together some questions that we'll ask the panel members, and we'll get this started off. Udi, why don't you come on up and talk through your first slides? I'll set them up. The first question is that Fred prepared are, what are the attributes of CSP with thermal storage, and how do we value those and why? Oh, there it is. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Hank, and good morning, everyone. I don't have an actual presentation. I just offered to put up a couple of slides and also make a quick advertisement for some work that we did. This question of how to value the attributes of CSP with thermal storage, when I joined BrightSource in early 2011, and we faced this question head on because we were negotiating some contracts with thermal storage, and what we found was that the utilities we were talking to, the renewable procurement departments weren't really equipped yet to value a dispatchable renewable resource. So we looked around at the literature on valuation of CSP with thermal storage, and really what we mainly found was Paul Denholm's earlier work. This recent study he has done was not out yet. So we felt the need at the time to cobble together all the existing work that we could find to tell the story about the value of CES with thermal storage. And this first slide is a list of economic and reliability benefits that we put together at the time. It's actually not an entirely complete list, but it's fairly complete. And Paul mentioned most of these components in his presentation. Obviously, energy value, it was one of the primary ones that were being valued by renewable procurement departments. But dispatchability as a function of energy was not being valued yet. Features like ramping reserves, the ability to have plants that could be on reserve to meet ramps, was not yet part of the analysis. Now, Paul's work has a proxy for that in his model. He has a load-following capacity reservation in his model, which is, in a sense, requiring the model to hold units on reserve, and CSP with thermal storage provides that in his model. But these are kind of new type of reserve products in most power systems. So this is an area for additional analysis, some of which Paul may do later. In addition, within the operating hour, the ability to follow a 5-minute dispatch signal, that's another area that Paul's research is going to look into. And we haven't done a lot of work in that arena yet. There is one other study actually funded by the California Energy Commission where a firm is going to utilize a model that does second by second and 5-minute dispatch for CSP plants. So there is literature, there's research out there, there's stuff underway to get into a better level of granularity with respect to the potentiality for these providing these benefits. Very quickly, the main categories, Paul mentioned energy, ancillary services. In some systems, ancillary services can be bought through markets, so you can get more insight into the value of those services. Another quick point, one of the trends in the markets is to pay for performance. So that's a feature of the ancillary service markets that Paul's model has not yet picked up. But in most of the ISO markets in the US these days, a unit on regulation is paid not just for its capacity, but also for its speed and following the regulation signal. So if you bring a fast ramping resource into the markets, it may be worth even more over time than is adequately captured yet by the valuation models. And then one other quick point about Paul's work, he mentioned capacity. He hasn't yet looked at frequency responsive reserves, but the California ISO may be adding a frequency responsive reserve in the near future, and there's some studies talking about that. And there's another potential value of CSP with thermal storage. And then finally on this list, one of the things that Paul's study did do, which was particularly innovative, was he adjusted the amount of ancillary services and load following reserves that the model had to carry when you added CSP. So he captured the fact that when you add CSP with thermal storage to your portfolio, you have a lower integration requirement compared to if you had added a PV system to your portfolio.